This 17th century map captures a crisis that took years to reach the battlefield. Collapses in Scotland and Ireland had already entangled the kingdoms. Movements in Edinburgh and Dublin actively dictated terms to London, turning local disputes into a regional struggle. At the center of the gridlock was King Charles I. He governed through the doctrine of divine right, the conviction that his authority to collect taxes, lead the church, and dictate policy was a mandate from God, making compromise a form of religious betrayal. Parliament, however, viewed these same powers as legal matters that required their consent. This disagreement over the source of authority turned standard tax disputes into an irreconcilable divide, making a total collapse of the state nearly inevitable. Throughout the early 1640s, the political machinery halted. Parliament issued long lists of grievances, demanding oversight of the king's advisors, while Charles ruled without them for over a decade. The final break happened when Parliament attempted to pass a bill seizing control of the militia. For the first time, the legislature attempted to take the king's sword out of his hand. In August 1642, Charles raised his royal standard in Nottingham, a formal call to arms, signaling he would defend his prerogative by force. By attempting to command the military, Parliament crossed a legal line Charles could not ignore. The dispute moved past the stage of petitions and was now a matter of armed survival. This engraving of the Battle of Edgehill captures the exhaustion of the first major encounter. Thousands died for no clear territorial gain, proving to both sides that this would be a long, punishing war of attrition. The king's supporters, the Cavaliers, relied on traditional loyalties and the shock of high-born cavalry units. However, leaders like Prince Rupert often lost control of these troops, who would abandon their positions to loot enemy supplies instead of securing the victory. They were opposed by the Roundheads, a collection of local militias and citizens who viewed the war as a defensive struggle to place legal limits on the king's power. As the fighting spread, cities like York and Bristol were trapped in prolonged sieges. For the civilian population, the war meant years of requisitioned crops and starvation as control of the country shifted back and forth. Charles eventually tried to bring in Catholic forces from Ireland to bolster his ranks. The move backfired, as the prospect of an Irish invasion alienated English Protestants and drove thousands of previously neutral citizens to support Parliament. Parliament realized that their regional militias were too disorganized to win a national war. These troops were often unwilling to fight far from their own homes, leading to a series of missed opportunities. To solve this, Oliver Cromwell helped create the new model army. This force was professionalized, centrally funded, and promoted men based on their effectiveness in battle rather than their social status. The innovation worked. By 1646, the king's main armies were destroyed, and Charles was forced to surrender to the Scots, hoping they would be more sympathetic to his title. Instead of accepting defeat, Charles escaped to the Isle of Wight. From there, he began secret negotiations to play his captors against each other, successfully triggering a second, even more bitter wave of fighting. This betrayal convinced the military leadership that Charles would never honor a peace treaty. As long as he remained king, the cycle of war would likely continue. The army took control of the political process. Cromwell's troops physically purged Parliament of any members who still wanted to negotiate, leaving only a rump of radicals behind. The objective had shifted from reform to removal. The leadership decided that the only way to ensure peace was to hold the king personally responsible for the bloodshed during the war. This illustration shows the unprecedented events of January 1649. For the first time in European history, a king was put on trial by his own subjects for treason against the people. On January 30th, Charles I was walked onto a scaffold at Whitehall and executed. The person of the king was dead, and the institution he represented was abolished. The execution dismantled the legal doctrine of the divine right of kings. By carrying out a public trial and execution, the army established the precedent that the ruler was an office holder, accountable to the law, not a representative of God above it. The new republic struggled to find its footing and eventually collapsed into a military dictatorship. Oliver Cromwell ruled as Lord Protector, maintaining order through the same force that had won the war. After Cromwell's death, the experiment failed. Parliament chose to avoid another civil war by inviting Charles II to return and restore the monarchy. While the king returned, the crown's absolute power did not. Charles II now relied on Parliament to fund the state's operations, making their cooperation a practical necessity. This shift in control over the nation's finances became the framework for the constitutional system that would develop over the following centuries.